Hello, my English teacher friends. So, the impetus of this writing workshop and this particular essay is rooted in so many different scenarios that I don't even really know where to begin. But let me contextualize. At the time of this recording, we're at the end of February, and as you guys know, I teach lit and lang, and those classes are going fairly well in pandemic teaching. I guess AP kids tend to be self-motivated, self-driven, and I like what I'm seeing. I'm in New York State, and I have Regent students, which is just general ed, and I have juniors. And I'm on February break this week, and I've been doing some reflecting. And I said, how much learning has occurred in your classroom from September to February? And I'm disappointed and just don't like what I'm seeing out of my students. And there are some reasons for that. So I'm in a district, probably like many of you, that has these really tight, confining curriculum maps that we must adhere to. And the other thing in my district is we have 10-week grading quarters, and we have to have 5 principal assessments in the grade book every quarter. So that means 5 essays principally, because that's what we tend to do. A couple projects in there. So getting away from the curriculum map is kind of difficult. And I'm just seeing that part of the reason why kids are so checked out and apathetic and disengaged is because the relevance of some of the teaching content and learning content in the curriculum map is so just not aligned with their interest, what's going on with the world, their fears, their anxieties. And I feel like we're in such troubling times. We really haven't given kids the space to talk and process through those things. I mean, we're in a pandemic. Uh, the world's a scary place. Their futures are very uncertain. And so I said, screw the curriculum map when we get back next week. I want to kind of probe a couple of things with these kids and do some self-reflection. So I have created an essay here that is 1 part personal reflection and 1 part synthesis. And it's stemming from an essential question that I'm very curious to hear the responses to. To what extent does your current level of motivation and effort align with your future goals? I see with my juniors in particular this give me something for nothing mentality. We get to the end of the quarter and they're like, what do you mean I'm failing? Why aren't I a 90? And I'm like, whoa, how could we be 30 points off here? Like, how could you really expect to receive a 90 with the little you've done, and how much you've checked out. So we have that element going on. And, I talk to my students, I have good rapport with them, and we talk about college and career and even above and beyond that. I'm like, dude, man, like your discipline and motivation are not going to allow you to get there. So something's going to need to change. So I know in our Facebook groups, a lot of teachers are struggling this year in particular. And I want to dive right in instead of trying to speculate and scheme and make conjectures and postulations. I want to ask the kids forthrightly this question and have them reflect upon it and see how they do. We're supposed to be doing Gatsby when we get back, and I'm like, I don't want to do Gatsby. I kind of want to see where they go with these reflections, and we'll get to Gatsby a little later. So this is the overview and rationale for it. One thing is crystal clear about teaching through a pandemic. COVID robbed a lot of students of their motivation to learn. While the reasons are numerous, the fact of the matter is that disengagement and apathy have become the new normal for a lot of students, which is true. It's something we're dealing with. But it is not an all or nothing proposition. Many students on the flip side are thriving. For this assignment, which is 1 part personal reflection and 1 part synthesis essay, you will be given an opportunity to critically assess whether or not your motivation is aligned with your goals. And that's kind of the umbrella concept of this. And in terms of directions and setup for this, here's what I have. So I have cobbled together some sources that get into kind of like the psychology, the sociology of self-motivation, self-determination. And I found online a very cool survey that the students can take that really breaks down um, where they fall motivationally. So the person that made the survey says that there are 9 different forms of motivation, and after the students take the survey, they can see what principally motivates them or holds them back from achieving goals. So there's articles and a survey that they're going to have to read and complete the survey. For this paper, since it is a self-reflection, you may write in the first person when appropriate to do so. So I'm going to have to Bob Ross that, because I know some teachers are like, absolutely no first person, but it's a self-reflection, so we're going to open up the gates for that, but give them some confines. And even though we are not writing within the context of a singular expository mode, we will nonetheless incorporate the templates we've been using over the course of the academic year. So since September, we've been using my templates, and the idea is that they can be used across the expository modes. So like we singularly do argument or persuasion, synthesis, rhetorical analysis, literary analysis. And it's very clear like how to manipulate the template. And even though this is a quasi-personal reflection synthesis, the template still can be used. So I'm going to Bob Ross that for the students. So we're shooting for 5 paragraphs, intro, 3 bodies, conclusion. And then the last stipulation, you need to draw from and incorporate at least 3 of the sources. As always, you can locate your own source material to help you advance your line of reasoning. So even though I have located a few sources, I have a lot of students that say, your sources aren't cutting it for me. Can I go locate my own things? And of course, they sure can. So for this paper in particular, it's really important that you Bob Ross your instruction. So I had the conception for this idea, and I immediately said, I wonder how this is going to work. I wonder how this is going to look on paper. I wonder what kind of difficulties will arise through the process of writing my own exemplars and models. And in the process of doing my own writing, I was able to troubleshoot the assignment. If I had just given it out to students, I think they would have mightily struggled with it because it's a little different kind of hybrid form of essay. So what you're going to see here is all the examples that I wrote. When I get back to school and launch this particular unit, we're going to do a writing workshop, and I'm going to say to students, you can declare or invert your thesis. I wrote 4 examples. Here they are. So you've seen it 4 times, figure it out, on your mark, get set, go, write your own. And usually doing that, it demystifies the writing process. And then for the body paragraphs, we're going to go syllogistically like always. I wrote 2 syllogistic body paragraphs. I'm going to walk them through it, talk them through it, and then on your mark, get set, go. And you really don't have that many questions. So all of the examples that you're going to look at today are mine. They're not student examples. And this is what I mean by Bob Rossing your instruction. You're the expert writer in the classroom. Get up to that easel and canvas and write for your students. Show them explicitly how to navigate through the essay. Just as when, Bob Ross comes onto the screen and says something closely akin to, hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage, and in the center of our canvas we're going to include a New England wood-covered bridge. He doesn't say, here's a graphic organizer, you got 2 blocks to do it, 2 bell periods to do it, on your mark, get set, go. I'll mill around and make sure there's no classroom management issues. No, he gets there, up to the canvas and the easel, and even if we are inept painters, we can closely approximate what he's doing and produce something decent. And if we continually do that with Bob Ross, we will become decent painters and grow and mature in our painting abilities. So that's what we can expect from our students when we Bob Ross, but we have to write with them. So the first question immediately out of the gate is, how do I write the introduction? And as always, even though, as I have said, this is a hybrid paper, we can declare or invert the thesis. So here's what I figured out, though. In getting anchored in a thesis statement, there's really two things that students need to do in order to answer that essential question. All right, and to address the prompt. They have to speak to their level of motivation. So like currently in this day, in this moment, to what extent are you motivated? And after they've read the articles and done the survey, they can give voice to that. They have an understanding. The second part is they have to answer the essential question. Is your current motivational state in alignment with your goals? And the answer to that question is going to be at the heart of the thesis statement. So let's take a look at a couple of examples and see how I tackled this. First, just to rehash, and some of you might be new to my templates. Some of you might be veterans, so just go over it again. If you're going to declare the thesis, you begin by answering the essential question. Just out of the gate, boom, answer the question. And that is a really easy way to ensure that you have a thesis. So for my struggling and emerging writers, that's the advice I give them. Just declare, right? Just make sure you got a thesis. That's more than half the battle. So from there, we get into some nuanced things. And I have some videos in my YouTube channel about this, and it's kind of a staple of my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind professional development. You'll see my students are really good at manipulating their syntax and wielding different sentence constructs. We practice that all year long. Strunk and White, in a text called Write It Right, assert that there's 12 different ways to construct a sentence. And I model this, I Bob Ross this. My students really have a lot of opportunity to practice this. So you're going to see that my students have some pretty good voice, rhythm, and flow in the other writing workshops. I wrote all of these, but I'll be practicing those things in my exemplars and just reinforcing it during the writing workshop that, hey, you got to pay attention to your voice, your rhythm, and flow. The other thing that we want to see is tier 2 level vocabulary. It's an academic paper, so we want our students to sound academic, but it's also personal reflection, so it's okay if they get into a little vernacular and colloquial. And I'm going to model for kids to what extent can they do that within respectable limits. So by tier 2 vocabulary, I just simply mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level words, and my students run the gamut of my Word Academy, my Word Study Academy, all academic years. So their vocabs really augment over time because we put so much concentration on it. So the other thing that you're going to want to do in the introduction is provide context and background. Do not get into the sources yet. Don't start quoting. Don't talk about the survey. Just context and background. So no plot summations or anything like that. And then, as always, an introductory paragraph is going to be exactly 4 sentences long, no more, no less. Remember, it's a template. It's a training wheel. We got guardrails up. We got scaffolds erected. So once they've mastered how to construct a thesis statement, then you can kick those, arbitrary confines off and let them be authors and make their own choices. But for learning purposes, 4 sentences. The opposite of the declarative is the inverted thesis. And ultimately, the only thing that changes is the placement of the thesis. So in this case, you begin with the context and background, focus on those sentence constructs, focus on the tier 2. It's exactly 4 sentences long, but you end by answering the essential question. So here's something that I learned through the process of writing my own exemplars and models for my students. I personally found it easier to invert, but I know that like my bottom like 5%, 7%, um, they're not there yet for the most part. They're going to struggle with that. So I want to show them a couple declarative as well, for their comfort and skill level. But for my more advanced and confident, competent writers, it was more skillful to invert than to declare. And that's just something I learned by Bob Rossing for my students. So it's good advice to give them. So let's look at a few examples, all right? And here's my first one. I am as lazy as they come. So there we go. I'm just demonstrating for them. Get personal, right? Speak to your level of motivation. So I'm like, right out of the gate, say I if you want to. And I know some of you are like, oh my God, no, 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 no. It's a personal reflection. So it's kind of a little quasi journal writing to some extent. So it's like, it's okay. We're okay. So I am as lazy as they come. If my future goals are to play video games way past a reasonable bedtime, have zero work ethic, and waste my days accomplishing absolutely nothing, then I'm right on track. But I have bigger aspirations than this. Here's the bottom line. I need to undergo a radical transformation, and soon, if I want to actualize my future goals. So there's a clear answer to the essential question, right? This, I say the student, I wrote this. I've spoken to my level of motivation. Look at the complexity of the sentence construct. So simple declarative sentence to lead. That second sentence is pretty twisted, right? Then you got another simple sentence, and then look at that fourth sentence. So that's the kind of stuff I want to see out of my students. We practice grammar, punctuation, syntax a lot. I have an academy for that, and there's some YouTube videos for that that you can check out. But that's kind of, especially at the end of February, that's what I want to see from my students. So the vocabulary is, casual, got some colloquial, got some vernacular, but it's not flippant, it's not, like a dude kind of Spicoli tone. It's got a little academic language in there as well. So pretty good. I think that's a good way to get, some spunk and some pizzazz and some flair for some voice for students to teeter-totter those. So here's one more. COVID showed the cracks in our system and all the reasons why working hard is for naught. First, my generation will not have the same opportunities as those who came before us. Therefore, working my tail off to get good grades, to get into a good college, to have an amazing career just seems pointless. Further, because everything feels so irreparably broken, I am like many of my peers in that I simply feel like giving up before I even begin the next phase of my post-high school life. So in my models and exemplars, I'm kind of thinking like, what are all the possible, paths students can go down to get a thesis? And I'm going to try to speak to a couple of those avenues, but it also triggers the synapses for them. Like, oh yeah, I kind of agree with that in part, but I have my own take, and then they can come up with their own authentic thesis statement. But in essence, in terms of how this is constructed, this is the exact same inverted thesis as the first. 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2, answer the essential questions, speak to your level of motivation. You can do that every single time. So, the template, you put it in the hands of every single student in your classroom, you model it a few times for them, and then you just say, execute, have at it. And you shouldn't have too many questions to field or, further clarification. My students tend to get it. So here's one more. The world is an oyster, and I was put on this earth to achieve great things. With my faith in a higher power and the idea that I have a purpose in life, I'm deeply motivated to do everything I can to be a bright light to change the world for the better. But all of this just does not happen by its own volition. I must work hard for all that I want to achieve. Therefore, I am determined and motivated to do whatever it takes to live a life that leaves an everlasting impact. 4 sentences, sentence construct, answer the essential questions, speak to your level of motivation. Have a little bit of tier 2, like I like, volition is a really good word, but the kid doesn't sound like a goon, they don't sound pretentious or pompous. They own that word. It's in their wheelhouse. So that's one of the things I tell my students, like, don't stretch too far. Like, the idea is like overusing $1,000,000 words is not the equivalent of doing good writing. You have to stay in your wheelhouse, like possess the word, make it natural to your voice. So kind of poured this one on a little bit, but you can see totally different thesis. So thesis 1, thesis 2, and thesis 3 are all very different. They're speaking, different paths, different avenues, but it's the exact same template. So that's what we want. Yield the thesis. And here's one last one. Our current political and social situation has left me with an overwhelming meh kind of feeling with regards to my future. I'm really modeling for the kids. You can be casual in this, like pump the brakes. Be you, like speak your truth, and let's be authentic and really have a thoughtful commentary on paper about what's going on in life right now with regards to motivation and goals and fears and anxieties, or like, I got this, I'm going to kick some major butt in life. So I really want them to have that space to kind of think on paper and work through some of those things. We are neither here nor there in that while we are a country with plenty, we are simultaneously a nation splitting at the seams. While it's hard to stay motivated when the news and social media constantly paints a bleak picture of the world, it's important to stay motivated and to have dreams, goals, and aspirations. For these reasons, I will continue to push on with a determined focus and to work hard so that I can achieve the goals I've set forth for myself. 4 sentences, sentence constructs, tier 2. Answer the essential question, speak to your level of motivation. And that's the whole kit and caboodle. So, do that all day long. So typically during writing workshops, after I've shown 4, I say on your mark, get set, go. And then, my students are so used to writing. We do so much writing, and we do a lot of sharing that, with my juniors, I typically just say, does anyone want to make sure that you are absolutely on the right path and that you're headed towards like a 95 or 100 out of the gate? Like, you've crushed your thesis, you've crushed your introduction. Or any of you like, I'm a little uncertain, I need some insight, I need some input on this. I would like the class's insight on this. And I say, if you are one of those students, submit your introduction to me. I'll keep it anonymous unless you want to self-identify, and we will look at your introduction and give it good, thorough, honest, critical feedback. And you'd be surprised, like in a class of 24 students, probably get like 5, 6, 7 kids, willfully submit it, and they self-identify. They say, I wrote this one, here's what I was trying to do. Thank you for the insight. And that's kind of how I try to create a community of writers. And of course, some kids will never submit, but it's okay. I'll look at it. So then moving on to the body paragraphs. That's our next question. How do I write the body paragraphs? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, you're going to say, holy cow, this guy's not joking. This template is universal. It works every single time. Even though we're doing personal reflection intertwined with synthesis, you can use the syllogistic method. And ultimately, the same thing that we do for argument and synthesis is what we're going to do for this, right? It's just that you can use first person and incorporate a little bit about yourself. And I was thinking, sometimes for FRQ3 with my AP Langers, I kind of discourage them from writing personally on the argument. I don't think it's as skillful as going with history, literature, pop culture, things of that nature. But sometimes we open the floodgates and I allow them to write about themselves. So it's a little bit of that personal FRQ3 with FRQ1, which is the synthesis. So real good hybrid opportunity here. So for those of you that aren't familiar with my template of the syllogistic method, and for those of you that may need a review, let me give a quick, sweeping, broad, general synopsis of this. And if you want to delve deeper into it, go browse my my YouTube channel, and there are a couple of videos on there where I really unpack this and give the history and a lot more concrete examples. But basically, the syllogistic method is rooted in the Aristotelian tradition, and Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn polemics, oration, and the art of debate. So, the great philosophical think tankers would throw out a question like, what is justice? And for those of you that are familiar with Plato's Republic, the book Plato's Republic, that's the essential question. What is justice? So somebody comes to the proverbial mic and they drop a syllogism, and all the students gather around and they're like, yeah, good point, but there's a hole in the logic here. I think we need to fix this syllogism and come up with something tighter. And it just goes on and on and on and on of philosopher presenting syllogism. It gets debunked, tore apart. It's inadequate. It's got flaws. Next guy comes to the mic, same thing. And ultimately what Aristotle realized was that the really good orators had a discipline to their arguments, that it was almost mathematical in its computation. And we see that in composition with regards to line of reasoning, teaching kids line of reasoning. We're ultimately teaching them to be cogent and logical in their arguments. So really no different from what Aristotle was doing, many, many years ago. So Aristotle just said a syllogism is basically when you argue from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say, first premise, arsenic is deadly. Second premise, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. Probably all nod your head and say that makes absolutely sense. There's no logical fallacy there. That's a perfect line of reasoning. And this is how we want our students to write. Just bap, 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 very clearly articulated arguments that make sense. So what happens with our students, though, and I actually am going to make a video on this relatively soon. If we take a look at, AP sample papers for Lang and Lit, students typically only present a second premise. They start the body paragraph with the second premise. And that's why when we sit down to grade, we're like, oh my goodness, could I get something above and beyond plot summary, please? So they ditched the demand of the assignment, whether it's rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, synthesis, and it's just plot. So we have to teach them how to argue in the first premise, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So all expository writing is argument, and I think students have a hard time grasping that, and we have to remember that as teachers. So the syllogistic method for a quasi-hybrid personal reflection synthesis is just going to use the same template as synthesis. So the first premise, we want a statement that contains a why reason. So up top in the thesis, we don't get into the specifics. We just drop the thesis. We answer the essential question. So in the first premise of the syllogistic body paragraph, we have to articulate our whys. Why did you answer the essential question in those words with that scope and that vision? So the first premise always is going to be 3 sentences long, because we want the student's argument to be central. The argument always must be central. Even the College Board says that for synthesis, but I say it for everything that my students do. The argument has to be central. So the second premise is where you're going to introduce the textual support. And I talk to my students about teeter-totter balancing the quoting and the paraphrasing together. From there, you move to the conclusion. And I really want to clarify this because sometimes teachers get confused on this. It's the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph, not the conclusion of the essay. So at the bottom of the paragraph, you have to conclude, and that's where your textual analysis comes. And I tell my students that the first premise is a promise, and to sustain the line of reasoning, you kind of got to make sure at the end you've fulfilled your promise. So it's like an echo, it's a link right back to the thesis. So real smart students say, all right, Mr. Kuhn, we're dealing with templates. So your introductory paragraphs, you want to be 4 sentences long. You must have a magic number for a syllogistic body paragraph, because otherwise you're going to get, kids that write 4 sentences, you're going to get, 28 sentences. What do you want? What's going to keep it cogent? And I tell my students to have enough support and analysis, they should shoot for 10 sentences per body paragraph, no more than 12. Because if they supersede 12, they tend to bloviate, break the line of reasoning, get wayward, go for bird walks, get plot heavy. And we don't want that. So to stay disciplined and sustain that line of reasoning, I say shoot for 10. So here are a couple that I wrote for my students. So the argument, the why reason takes 3 sentences. And, it's interesting in writing these because I was like, yeah, you totally can, you're talking about yourself. So this is where the personal reflection is going to come in the argument. And then the synthesis comes in the second premise. So first 3 sentences, why argument. So check out how I set this up. As soon as we went into lockdown 2 years ago, my motivation went out the window. And I'm telling my students here, the prompt is asking you to talk about motivation. So in your argument, you kind of got to be talking about motivation because it's your thesis, it's your prompt. So don't deviate from that. In order to have your line of reasoning, you have to stay anchored in the prompt and the thesis. So make sure you're talking about motivation and not something else. Given that I was cut off from seeing friends, playing sports, and going to school, I fell into a slump and basically huddled myself in my bedroom, not accomplishing much with my days. But since then, now that schools are reopened and life has gotten back to semi-normal, I'm stuck in this pattern and can't seem to break it. All right, so if first premise is a promise, let's break down what this kid is saying here. I promise you, dear reader, to talk about my motivational state and how I'm stuck and the reasons why. So it's easy to sustain such a line of reasoning. Don't bring in anything extraneous. All of the quotes and paraphrase from the source material needs to be germane to that promise. Otherwise, you're going to have a break in the line of reasoning. So look at where I go here. 4th sentence, let's get into the sources, right? Immediately get into the sources. And I tell my kids, you're synthesizing, so you got to draw from the source material a few times. What it ultimately boils down to is that for a person to embark on a project, he has to value the return on his labor more than his loss of comfort. Perina, it's one of the articles that I have. So 4th sentence, get into it, all right? Get into your source material. You'll see that when you look at my student writing, most of them have pretty silky smooth quote transitions. And one of the things I'm modeling here for my students, yet again, is what I call the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words, so not exactly, a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote small, it should sound conversational. So I have this quote. It has to, be unpacked and fall beneath the umbrella concept of the first premise so that everything stays cogent and I have that line of reasoning. So look how you transition out of this. The problem is this. In our uncertain times, no one knows, especially the kids in my generation, if there will be a return on investment. So I'm unpacking that quote. Also note my vocab, note my sentence constructs. Nothing's changing. Voice, rhythm, flow. It is a truth that nobody knows what tomorrow holds, but we all know that there's a reason to be fearful and cautious given the current situation. In this regard, therefore, I am motivated by fear. And again, stay anchored in motivation. But the problem with this form of motivation is that there's only one side of the coin, in that the fear is strong enough to prevent you from quitting. So, quote from Buckley. So we got a couple of sources. We got Perina, we got Buckley, we're synthesizing. Good. So it looks like I'm going to disagree with this quote. And that's something I want to teach my students. Like, you don't always have to cherry pick the quotes that are aligned with whatever it is you're trying to say. Take a quote and tear it apart and disagree with it. That's really skillful to do. So again, you quoted, transition out of it, unpack it. There is another aspect to this, however. What if the fear is so overwhelming that it stops a person dead in their tracks and they become so absolutely stymied by terrifying what-if scenarios? This is what has happened in my instance. The future is so uncertain and is seemingly very bleak, so much so that obtaining my life goals feels like an impossibility. In looking at my survey results, so now we're into 3 sources, and that's what I'm going to tell my students, like use 3. Use 3 in each body paragraph so that we really practice weaving the source material together to elucidate the answer to the question, the essential question. So in looking at my survey results, it is clear that my imagination gets the better of me because I often get waylaid by fear-based thinking. Given my personality and temperament, in the face of fear, I in a sense play dead. Robinson calls this the opossum effect, in that most of us are still hardwired to our lizard brains in terms of our fight or flight responses. I got plenty of textual support in there. Plenty. And I don't want to go over 12 sentences because you can see here this can get a little long, right? And we don't want overkill. So I'm at the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. Link, echo, keep the promise. And it just takes a couple of sentences. So look how this all ties back. I'm not as lazy or unmotivated as I may project. Because of COVID and how that altered things greatly for me and my peers, I simply got stuck in the rut of some bad patterns that I need to break. Knowing is half the battle. Now I just need to get motivated and make some strides forward. And in the next paragraph, this kid, who happens to be me, can tackle those things and get more specific. So, not only am I concluding one body paragraph, I'm transitioning to the next. And that's kind of how you argue syllogistically. So that's just one example, but to really elucidate for students how to do it, I'm going to show them one more time. And, I tell them, like, student A wrote this one, student B wrote exemplar number 2. Totally different perspective, totally different thesis, totally different take, but we're going to use the exact same template. So next paragraph, stick to the template, bust out another syllogism. So my first 3 sentences are going to get into my why, reason, argue. So many things changed since the pandemic started, because when life came to a halt, many cracks in the system were exposed. This is especially true of the American educational system. When schools shut down for a number of months, the sheer dysfunction and ineffectiveness of long-standing practices became increasingly clear. We've got a singular focus here in terms of our promise, right, to the first premise. I anticipate, starting from the 4th sentence, which begins the second premise, that this kid is going to offer a critique of the educational system. Nothing else should come in here. Nothing extraneous should come in here. So we don't want to be talking about, the Trump administration. We don't want to be talking about, Fauci. We don't want to be talking about, Caillou being pulled off the air. None of that stuff. So we're going to exclusively, solely focus on a broken educational system. So all the quotes, all the paraphrasing needs to be germane to that if we are going to sustain the line of reasoning. So let's see how I did it here. Fourth sentence, get into the sources. But now that schools have reopened under what are somewhat normal conditions, teachers are reporting that a large percentage of their students are disengaged, apathetic, refusing to do the work, and intellectually shut off. So that comes from Peters. I did my 5-word rule, and sounds conversational. Let's keep going. I quoted. I got to unpack that. I got to build. I got to, more support, more analysis for my line of reasoning. The reason for this is because attitudes have changed. While attitudinal motivation typically deals with a person's negative thinking and stubbornness, a shift occurred during COVID in that people learned that the schooling system was predominantly grading a student's willingness to comply, not assess aptitude or learning. And that comes from Hovers. So now we got 2 sources in here. And again, sometimes when students quote, they totally abandon the quote. They run right away from it. I call that quote dumping. So let's unpack this. In all honesty, the curriculum in my school unmotivates me. As a 16-year-old junior in high school whose future is so uncertain and rocky, I cannot for the life of me understand how I am to get enthusiastically motivated to read books like Gatsby and Macbeth that feel so disconnected from the issues that seem so pressing in my everyday life. So not only am I demonstrating like how to write and how to construct a syllogistic body paragraph, I'm demonstrating for my kids, like, dude, be honest, like reflect, like really get critical, and let's speak some truths here, like let it fly, let's be honest and really talk about what's going on. So this example in particular, might raise some eyebrows, but I don't know, as a teacher, I kind of feel this way, to some extent. Things feel disconnected at times, and I think it's part of teacher frustration and student frustration. So I'm out of space on this slide, so the syllogism is going to continue on the next. Sure, it can be argued that reading the classics is important, but let's be honest. How is this serving me in the here and now? And again, keep paying attention to the sentence constructs, the vocab, that balance of the vernacular, the academic, voice, rhythm, flow, nuance. The short answer is this: it is not. Buckley contends that goals associated with self-awareness and self-change will be met with attitude motivation. And I really am showing my kids how to disagree with quotes. I think it's super skillful when they can do this. I couldn't disagree more. Given that the curriculum in my school is so far removed from what's actually going on in my life, I actually have shut down and simply don't care to play the game of school anymore. And again, we got plenty of support and analysis. Let's go back to the first premise. Are all the quotes and paraphrases that we have in the second premise linked and relevant to that first premise? And the answer is absolutely yes. The kid, which happens to be me, did not deviate. There's like great line of reasoning here. It's very tied together. So in the conclusion, let's link, let's echo, let's promise. There are so many issues in the world that teenagers are faced to shoulder in the new normal. If school systems continue to refuse to acknowledge this, then they cannot complain about kids checking out and disengaging. Motivation and personal relevance go hand in hand. Let's make school relevant and see what happens. One of the things that I talk to my students a lot about is the use of the short, simple declarative sentence. Prior to teaching them the idea and the concept that there's 12 different ways to write a sentence, early in the academic year, students completely over-rely on the short, simple declarative sentence. And maybe you, as you've graded student work, you see that. It's like short, simple declarative, short, simple declarative. And it's like a train wreck, they just clobber you over the head with the short, simple declarative. So I really tell my students clearly when to use it, and especially in the conclusion of the syllogism, it's when you want to drop the hammer and kind of talk like a lawyer and really, really, really emphasize your argument. So you'll see in my models and examples, and probably some of my students' work too, some of my better students, they tend to conclude with the short, simple declarative, which is a nice way to end. So hopefully those models and exemplars kind of show you clearly how to go about teaching this particular essay. I'm excited to launch into it when we come back from break. I think it's very relevant. I think it's going to help kids out. Um, I think it's going to yield engagement and some good conversation, some good reflection, and hopefully it can jumpstart the year, because I'm seeing with my seniors a lot of senioritis. Juniors, a lot of kids checking out, even some of my AP kids. So we got to struggle, some of us, I see in the Facebook groups, we're struggling. So I think this might be, um, a catalyst or an impetus for some change. So real quick to end here, as I've said in other Facebook posts and videos. Every month, I'm on the docket with Perfection Learning to do some free webinars. I have a couple coming up. They really want me to do one on my alternative grading methods, which is always exciting to learn how to reclaim your evenings and weekends and not do traditional grading methods, which I contend don't work that well. So I'll let the groups know when that exactly is going to happen. I got an iron in the fire with the National Writing Project, so I got, I'll be doing some things with them, and again, I'll keep the group notified of that. And then probably my biggest iron right now is that Tim Freitas, whom you might be familiar with, he posts in the groups quite a bit, Garden of English guy. We're collaborating on a textbook where we're basically going to demonstrate that there's many ways to skin the compositional fish. So he's got his templates, I have my templates, and some of you that follow us both closely, you're like, well, wait a minute, Tim said to do it this way and Christian said to do it this way. It's all confusing to me, I don't know. So we're just going to have this nice conversational textbook where we go back and forth, demonstrating how to manipulate our templates, and have the idea that one's not better than the other. There's multiple ways to do this. So I'm in the research development phase, or research gathering phase of my portion of the textbook. And what I've done to get some of that research and data is created a course called the Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind. And what we've been doing is, I cap it at like 5 to 7 teachers so that there's enough TLC and enough of me to go around and, get a good fostering collaborative group of teachers. We've been meeting Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for 5 weeks, and we basically do all thing templates, all things alternative grading methods, all things alternative discussion modalities, and these teachers are looking to revamp, reframe, kickstart their writing curriculums. They take my methodologies and modalities into the classroom. I work with the students and the teacher. We report back on Sundays and just see what changes when we change our approaches, when we take a Bob Ross approach, when we use these templates. And it's really cool. So I've run a couple so far, and they've been very successful. So if you're looking to kickstart your writing program or to learn some new tricks, feel free to drop me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And if you want the PowerPoint that we just looked at for your own classroom use, you can email me as well. And if you want more information about that Teach It Right 5-Week Mastermind, I do have a web page that has some information on it, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. So hopefully you guys, got excited about this, paper, this essay, and this opportunity for your kids to reflect personally and really, talk about the elephant in the room. I think, most of us are battling, some real struggles this year. So, all right, that's it for now. Happy teaching, happy writing.